We're gonna wait just a moment for Ms. Red to join us, and then we'll move on. Introductory meeting. I'll go ahead and start this. So now we're gonna go through the objective of the program. We'll go through introductions. Get to know each other. Ask you to tell me what you're trying to do here. We'll talk about what we're trying to accomplish with this meeting. We'll go through some planning principles and some of the planning environment in Texas right now. And then we'll talk about density-based zoning versus current zoning. Don't get your questions, so we have those things to go out and do some research and bring them back to the next meeting. Sound like a plan?
Yep, we plan works.
Yes, please. So you guys all did your homework, right? You all read this?
Yeah.
Okay. It'll be a quiz later.
All right. Right.
All right. So some of you are part of the past Recode objectives, which were pretty broad, trying to sort of take a look at the entire code. Council has focused us a little bit. We really want to, this is the objectives that council has set for this specific process, which we're trying to accomplish in quicker time. So eliminate form-based code and related regulations to get back to a functional code which can easily be enhanced in the future and establish basic zoning ordinance that is simple to enforce and does not create obstacles to realize compatible and cohesive development. That's our overall objective over the next couple months. What we'd like to do now is do introductions. We're going to start with committee members. What I'd like you to do is tell us, who you are, your background with the city, and what problem are you trying to solve? What's this effort? Fair question?
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you start over here?
You pick on me first. Okay. My name is Preston Walhood. I'm a developer member of the committee. So I work for Warner Group, and our firm has been developing the North Texas region since the 90s. And we have been working in Rowlett specifically since 2018. We have a project on the very north end of town that trails Recode Creek that is really attached to the city kind of by an umbilical cord. And we have been, I guess back to me, have been in the development business for 35 years. I've been with the firm for 10. And we're focused primarily on higher end single family development communities. And so we came across this project. It had a bunch of challenges in 2018 and started working with the city and have been through several different groups, several different administrations, several different councils, and have learned a lot because our project is the 2012 draft is regulated by the 2012 draft of the form-based code that was redlined, not yet approved or enacted, incorporated into a PD, and then approved. So it is regulated by the Rowlett Development Code, but it is moderated inside the PD as the form-based code. So we have minor warrants, major warrants, SUPs, anything you can think of is a part of this development code. And it is a big challenge to administer that and to figure out how do we deliver what the market is asking us for into a community. And so we became interested in helping with this committee because we have firsthand experience of how both codes work and how both codes conflict. And we have an idea of here's where we've seen this done in other communities. My partner served on a Recode board in Parker, Lucas, Fairview. Plano was the head of the Plano EDC and Plano Development Committee for 10 years. And then I've served on one in Justin, Texas as well. So we're familiar with this process and look forward to trying to provide some input.
Hi, I'm Stan Martin. I'm retired, 40 plus years as a certified safety professional, working every type of industry from chemical manufacturing, defense contractor, worked for a university. I've done environmental safety, health, code regulations. Primary responsibility was to read the codes, read the new regulations being proposed, seeing how they impact said employer, and also to look for any loopholes that were legal loopholes. Been a citizen of Rowlett since April 1st of 2003. I guess the reason I decided to join is, like I said, I'm retired and I've got a lot of free time. You know, one of the things I liked about, and I love about Rowlett is I like the small town feel of the city, but I also realize that, you know, we need to bring some type of economic development into town. Also, I'm not real thrilled with the number of recent multifamily structures that have gone up. Yeah, that's what I'm here for. Whatever I can offer as far as my time and background of reviewing laws and regulations and codes, being there as a resource.
Yeah, I'm Mark Dameron. I just moved here just about 13 months now or so from the Los Angeles area, California. And family and I just fell in love with Rowlett and being the area. And I'm here because I just really want to help guide Rowlett for the future.
Hello, I'm Tamara Williams. I have been here since 1987, and I have, my main interest in being on this committee is to resolve the conflicts between the development code and the form-based code, and to simplify the process for the developers.
My name is Kelly McKee, and I've been in Rowlett for 20 years now, and I've been involved with the city in various capacities, board adjustments, planning and zoning for quite a while. I stay pretty up to date on what's happening. Go to all the city council meetings, most of the city council meetings, and I watch a lot of the P&Z meetings online. And just interested in resolving the conflicts. And probably help, I'm an attorney, so I probably help with language, if there's conflicts, things like that, so. That's what I'm doing.
Good afternoon, early evening for everybody. Jonathan Reeves, I'm currently on city council, so I'm one of the two council folks on this, and I want to be a code breaker. That's what I want to do. And actually, the problem I would like to try to solve is how can we make Rowlett a more interesting and beautiful city to live in? I think sometimes with some of the form-based code, things start getting too cookie-cutter-ish, hence the code breaking. And I'd just like to see us, with the remaining land areas we have, be able to use to be more interesting and beautiful for the rest of us.
I'm John Kitt. I've been in Rowlett for 15 years, been somewhat active in the city, planning and zoning commission, and a couple other task force. But I think that we need to definitely revise our code so that it's a little bit easier to use and also a little easier to administer. But we also need to resolve some issues or try to set aside in the code some cutouts for truly workforce, I would call it workforce housing. And I'm not talking about subsidized housing, but just housing that are on lots and in sizes that allow people to enter the housing market. Right now, we don't really have a lot of that available. So, and I also know that we also have a little bit of interest in bringing some commercial development in the city and supplement the tax base. It will burden off all residents.
I'm Mark LeShue. I'm on the city council, and the other liaison. I was voluntold. Been in Rowlett for 12 years. Started with the Parks Board about 6 years ago, and it's kind of morphed into being on city council now. I do not consider myself really, not even anything like an expert on code, other than I hear all the complaints and I see all the issues. I'm so glad you're here, Preston. I mean, to get that kind of input. I mean, it's such a problem for me. I think the big problem is it discourages development. It discourages people putting their money into Rowlett. That's a bad thing. And anything we can do to, I'm big about, not giving up the city and just carte blanche, but there's somewhere between just getting stepped all over and having these minuscule codes and rules that conflict, where they're actually, polar opposites, and we have them. He's not, and that's unacceptable. I mean, that's just not, organizationally and process-wise, that's just not a sustainable situation. So that's really what I hope to come out of this with, is a much cleaner, much more defined. We talked about, if you have to make some variances, have the rules that make it easier to do those. All those things, for me personally, those are the goals that I'm kind of focused on.
I'm Stanley Pollard. Moved here in mid 1989. I was on PNC from 95 to 2005. On the comprehensive plan the last time. Been on several other boards, Board of Adjustments and Building Codes and Appeals, back before PNC. What I want to do is see the form-based code demolished. I've never liked it since the adoption of it. I had one mayor that was mayor at the time that they adopted it tell me after a meeting that we had during COVID, he said, "You're right, that's the worst thing we ever did. We should have never done it." And I want to see that the codes are easy, not only for citizens to understand and know what may be built near or next to them, but also for the building community, that they also have an easy path to be good citizens here and build. Somehow, for 30 years, Rowlett's been known as business unfriendly, and I don't see that at all. I see the minimum standards that we had in landscaping and other requirements were minimal compared to cities such as Lauderdale, Frisco, and McKinney, and I could go on and on, where they were requiring much more than what we did. For the life of me, I don't understand how we seem to get labeled as a business unfriendly city. I won't belabor a lot of things, but I'll just say this. When Home Depot came to town, I was on PNC, and Home Depot came with plans that was just tilt wall construction and so forth. We asked for a better product. I asked for the facades of several of the cities I just mentioned that they had built in, and 2 weeks later they came, they gave us prints, and I said, so where's the facades for Flower Mound and Louisville and Frisco, and was told right off the bat, you're not getting that. And I said, so why not? Well, there's just not enough business. To which I told the guy I would vote against it, and I did. We got called into a meeting with City Council about how business unfriendly. And listen, we have minimal standards. They're not even willing to give us what they would die to put in other towns. And so I don't see that as being business unfriendly. I just want some quality project. Well, that's the driving force here, being on this committee, is that whatever codes we put in, to have something that we can all be proud of, both business and citizens in this town. So I just don't want the regular little old things just to come in I want something nice that they would build across the lake in Rockwall, for goodness sakes. And so, anyway, that's it.
I don't know why I'm on this committee. Not that I've heard all your credentials, because I don't have any of that background. What I do bring to the plate here is I've lived here for 34 years. And I've seen Rowlett, and I'm gonna come to you as just a citizen. I don't have all this fancy background you do. I've come to you as a former teacher. I've done real estate. I've had a psychotherapy practice for 35 years. But I'm very concerned about the town, and that's why I'm here. I see that you have a gold mine. You've got the infrastructure, you've got a lake, okay? Rockwall doesn't have the infrastructure you have. You've got Bush, you've got 66, you've got 75, you've got 635. What you don't have, what I see you don't have, is you don't have code enforcement, and you don't have the city in a attractive manner, I'll put it that way. Particularly Dow Rock. Drive down Dow Rock and see the plywood that's functioning as a fence right now. See the walls falling down. That is a major road that people have to go down to get to the grocery store. You've got a huge development coming in, okay? You've got an opportunity, like you're saying, if you stick with quality, you could attract bigger businesses. They're not gonna come when you don't have people here that have the income to afford to use their business. That's what I see, just a practical thing. So I'm very concerned. I live on the lake. I'm invested in my property. I don't want to move, but I'm almost to the point, I've got to move from this place. It's getting so bad. It's getting so bad. So I'm here to see how can we beautify the city? How can we up the quality so we can attract the higher end, okay? So that we can attract people that want to live here. And I'll tell you what people refer to this city as. They refer to it as the trashy city. They do, I'm just telling you. Rockwall, many realtors, here's what they say. Well, you can move over there, but they don't take care of their properties. There's a lot of, and people move to Rockwall instead. But see, Rockwall doesn't have what you have that you could fine tune and actually have more income. I believe you could have more income because when you attract and have the kind of homes you're talking about, you're going to get more tax dollars. But if we keep letting the properties run down, and here's what I see, code's not enforcing. You're not enforcing what's already on the code that says you've got just normal things like keeping your yard mowed, keeping your fence straight, leaning mailboxes, trash on the side of your house, just things like that. If that was corrected, screening walls around trailer parks, these are things that you could require that have the person who owns it do, not the city have to pay for it. Anyway, that's why I'm here, because I'm interested in maintaining my property value. And it's not going to be maintained if we don't maintain the city. So that's the main, I don't know if that even fits with what we're talking about, but that's why I'm here.
Very good. What was your name?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you my name. Maybe I don't want you to know my name.
I know.
Sharon Red.
Sharon?
Uh-huh.
Okay, Sharon.
So we do have staff, and we're going to introduce ourselves. Understand, staff does not have a vote. We're here to provide you context and options to broaden the perspective of the conversation and to help you get to consensus as best we can. But we do have interests, and I want to make sure those interests are shared as well, so you can understand we all have biases, right? So that you can discount something I say if you know it's because of one of my biases, right? So over here, we're going to introduce these two first.
Hi everyone, I'm Liliana. I'm one of the planners here. Have a little bit over a year and a half of experience with code review. I was more so on the long range side of things, so it's also new to me. But in the time that I have been working on review. What I see most is just flexibility in the code. It's not there, and it's hard for us, and hard for the developer, and hard for our community when they come in with an ask to let them know, hey, these are the different avenues that you have to be able to achieve the same goal. Very hard for us to do that as staff. So I would definitely like to see more of that on our new code, and just new trends that are happening to keep us on top of what's happening with, just in Texas in general, and and the cities around us. So we're not staying behind, right? So new uses that I would love to see incorporated into our code that I think our community would love to see. And a lot of the times we just have to say no because our zoning won't allow it. So it would bring a new opportunity for businesses to develop here in Rowlett at the same time becoming aware of the built environment and in general. I think it would be something nice to have, just new trends coming in that would benefit Rowlett.
I'm Brittany Musser. I started the city a little less than 6 months ago. I came from the city of Grand Prairie. I'll just say this is a pretty inaccessible code, I would say. We read it day in and day out, and it still can be hard for us to administer and interpret at times. Definitely can be inaccessible for developers. So some things are unclear, like I've all stated. Some things are just silent in the code that should be there. I think really hit the nail on the head in that it just hasn't really been updated in a long time, and it kind of shows. So I think getting some clarity, simplifying some things, adding flexibility for developers and staff and y'all as well as we try to get things developed, which is huge in making this a much more successful code, I think.
I'm Christoph Bauer, Deputy City Manager. I'm a recovering attorney. I've been in local government for over 30 years. I've been in Washington, Montana, Arizona, North Carolina, and now Texas. So I've seen cities and states handle this issue in a significant variety of ways. And I have a strong bias, and it's all about fiscal sustainability. That's particularly important here in Texas. And I'm going to step up on the board and show you. Some of you guys have heard this all before, right? So in Texas, our tax regulations, property taxes, we have M&O, right? This is maintenance and operations. Then we have I and S, interest and sinking. The growth rate for M&O is 3.5% plus growth. Okay? And that's dollars. It's not rate, it's not value. So if our values go up, we still cannot collect any more than 3.5% more than we collected the previous year. Now, just the step increase for our police officers and firefighters is usually 4 to 5%. And that's the vast majority of what M&O supports, is public safety. And this is interest and seeking. Now, currently, we have some flexibility in how we use debt. This rate can float depending on how much debt has been spent. However, there's a bill before the legislature right now, which will take this and effectively bring it down here as well. So our growth rate would basically be stuck, 3.5% plus growth. Now, something that you guys may or may not have heard, in single-family residential, long-term, does not pay for this. Does not cover the cost of its infrastructure. Right? Anybody not understand that? Okay, I'll give you a diagram. This is just about asphalt roads. Why asphalt roads? Because I've seen most data about asphalt roads. This is money, right? This is time. You start off with an asphalt road, your maintenance costs go up, then you resurface it, they come down. They go up, they come down. Asphalt road. So you have an average cost to maintain that road. An interesting piece about this is that you start at zero. Why do you start at zero?
Because it's dedicated to you.
That's right. The developer puts it in first. So the developer puts it in at their cost. So you have this period of time where that money doesn't need to be spent. You're generating revenue from that investment, but it's not going back to that street. So that fixes this road. Right? So growth is what keeps you sustainable. If you don't have growth, right, you get 3.5% in Texas. And that's it. Doesn't matter what the values are. You get 3.5%. And this is the same story for water infrastructure, sewer infrastructure, and everything else that you build and are responsible for as a city is this. So I'm always looking for what can we do? Now, what does pay for itself? You guys aren't going to like this, of course. High density residential, commercial, mixed use. That actually covers its cost. As we look at different building forms, what I'm always going to be looking for is the efficiency of the development. So it's cost per acre versus revenue per acre. Okay. How many miles of infrastructure do we have to support how many homes, businesses, etc.? Because that mile of road doesn't care whether it serves one house or 20 houses, it costs the same. The amount of traffic on this road doesn't really change this formula that much. Okay. So if it's carrying one car or 4,000 cars, it may go a little bit sooner, but it's not dramatically different. So your infrastructure cost is always something that, again, I'm in the city manager's office. What do we worry about? The money. All right? Because that's our job. Is to try and make sure we have fiscal sustainability long term. So that's my bias. So as we go through this, kind of going back to what you guys have talked about, what we're trying to achieve here, is that we're really looking at zoning methodologies. Where we're going to really focus on that initially is what zoning methodology, what paradigm do we want to start with. And we're going to talk about two different ones. The current one, which is based on lot size and lot configuration, and a different one, which is based on density. But these are the goals. You guys have talked about this. Protect desired existing uses, incent desired new uses, communicate effectively. I think one of our biggest challenges is to make sure we're communicating both to the residents and to the business community what we want as a community, and doing that through our zoning. So the main goal tonight is basically orientation, and we're going to try and give you as much information we can for you to help us make that decision about which paradigm do we want to use for future zoning. We're not going to ask you to make that decision tonight. We're just going to set it up, get questions from you, bring those questions back so we can make decisions at the next meeting. And then once we've gone that path, off we go. We'll start writing. So everybody did their homework, right? So you understand what this is? So you've got the different kinds of zoning methodologies. What we have is currently, except for the form-based, of course, is what's called a traditional Euclidean zoning code. That just means you've got very siloed zoning. You've got things that are residential, commercial, not a lot of mixed-use opportunities, everything's segregated. We have a form-based code, of course. Actually, I don't think they actually have, this is my opinion. We don't really have a form-based code. We have a kind of a form-based code. It's just personal, by the way. Density-based zoning, smart code, and some hybrid zones. So different kind of ways to approach these. This is the zoning paradigm or thought that I really like. It's called turning on a transect. And it's a planning theory that talks about sort of how you should develop as a region. So you start out natural, undeveloped, move to rural, suburban, green urban zone, or urban center zone, urban core, and then you're basically downtown areas. So it's kind of how you sort of look at it regionally to sort of move from one step to another as you develop and grow. Part of our challenge in this community is we kind of have things that are not necessarily consistent. We have pretty high dense over here, low dense over here. So it doesn't really sort of follow a traditional pattern. So that's broken because of our major infrastructure we have. The highways really drive a lot of the development that occurs. Regional and national issues. Housing affordability is a big issue. Heard some of you mention that tonight, change their quoted. And in Texas, this actually surprised me when I did this research. There is actually a Senate bill that's passed the Senate. And take one of those.
There's a lot of those.
And it's in the House. And I think the House passed a different version. I haven't done that research yet. But basically what this says is that, and it only applies to, right now, cities of 150,000 or more. It does not apply to Rowlett yet. Basically it says that you can't require bigger than a 1,400 square foot lot. How big a 14? I mean, most people's first floor of their house is 1,400 square foot. So basically, and you can't restrict density to lower than 31 units per acre. So it takes away the zoning authority of larger cities to actually control density. Now this is unique to the Texas legislature. They'd love to take local authority away, in my opinion. Other states have controlled growth differently. There are different methods to do it. Apparently this is the way Texas wants to do it. And what I hear that the conversation is that everyone's concerned about sprawl. Sprawl out into, we see it here, of course it impacts us. All the growth out in Fate, Rockwall, etc. That growth goes through us. And that also is taking up a lot of farmland. So you have the rural legislature saying, we gotta stop this sprawl. Of course you have the urban legislature saying, we want more affordability. And they can't get through this neighborhood reluctance. And so the Texas legislature has decided they want to do it for us. We have this other idea, housing ready city. I was talking to Ms. Williams about this. She doesn't like this idea. Is that fair?
That's fair.
So I sent this out earlier, so most of you have seen this. These are Texas examples. So if anybody want a copy, I have a couple of these. There you go. And pass it down. Anybody wants one to take one?
That's just one that goes in the home.
Correct. It's in the homework. We've already got it. But basically it talks about, and we've had this conversation with council about accessory dwelling units being allowed by right. It talks about those kinds of things where it pushes to, again, require more density and take authority with local jurisdictions to stop that density from occurring. And the reason why I bring this up is that it is the context on which we're working. And those interests are out there. You get to decide what kind of zoning we have and how it's applied. We'll talk about that in a minute. We got to understand that there is pressure in the region and in the state that may impact our authority. And certainly there's an interest, I would recommend, that we understand that to some extent as we make decisions. So this is a two-step process. The first step we're going to work on is developing the toolbox. What that means is we're going to develop the kinds of zones we have, what tools are in the chest. Just because you have that hammer doesn't mean you have to use a hammer, right? The next step is picking out the tool and applying it to the city. So just because we have a multifamily zone doesn't mean you apply it. It's there in case the future council wants to signal a change in use in that area. They can pull that zone out and they have it defined. They can place it. Or an applicant wants to apply for a rezone, they have that available as a tool rather than having to create it a whole cloth. So the two-step process, going back.
Can we make comments through your presentation?
Feel free.
All right. I, for one, would be on the bias of quite differently. I understand what you're saying up here. But I think we have to all ask ourselves, why did we move here? Why did I not move into Dallas? Why did I want to be on the outskirts? And if you live in a bigger metroplex, especially the Northeast, you get to the point of, do I want row houses?
Now, Mr. Harlow, I'll put you there for a second for space of time. You get to decide. You can use the tools that we develop to decide we're not growing at all. You can make that decision as a community. So all we're doing is giving you the tools. You decide how to apply. So if you want to not apply any zoning for multifamily or townhouse, that is your decision, not ours as staff. We're empowering you with options. That's why I made one thing clear. There's two steps here. We're going to develop the toolbox. Some of those tools you may not like. don't use them. Don't use them today. But it's something you want to use in the future.
But it's important to have them. I'll give an example of a small city
Changes.
that said, we don't want any commercial retail zoning in Collin County. And so they eliminated it from their zoning code 20 years ago. Today, they have two major thoroughfares coming through. They have no code for commercial retail zoning. All they have is single family, minimum 2-acre lot size. And the council's scratching their head. How do we accommodate what's going to happen right here? Because no one wants a 2-acre lot on 2 6-lane divided highways. And we have 4 retail corridors, and what do we do? Because we don't have the tool.
So just quickly, sort of where we are now, we've got 2 codes. We've got the Rowlett Development Code, which is the traditional Euclidean zone. We've got square footage with pretty significant restrictions on lot size. There's a minimum width, minimum length. They're basically triangles. And they've got the form-based code, which I call a hybrid, because it's, you have a question?
Yeah, when I was reading over this and everything, how can 2 codes exist at the same time?
They're not well.
I mean, I'm looking at going, how the hell do you do that?
And that's the reason why we're here.
Yeah.
But, and actually, so we don't have 2. We have multiples of that. I'm going to show that to you in the next slide. We have PDs, planned developments. Planned developments are basically their own zoning district, where they have a developer has come forward and said, I know what your RDC says on your form-based codes. I don't want to do that. I want to do something different. And they either get a yes or a no. In our community, most of the time they get a yes. 32, this includes streets. You take out streets, almost 35% of our communities in the PD. From an administrative perspective, that means when someone asks us, is this fence required? We gotta go find that PD. And to be blunt, not all these PDs are written very well. These guys are pulling up things from 1985. They weren't even born yet.
And a lot of missing information on our end.
Exactly, and they don't have all the information they need to answer the questions that are asked. So this, for me, again, the conclusion I reached from having this many PDs is that our zoning has not been successful. It has not been successful in dictating what we want as a community. It has not been successful at telling the developers what's acceptable for us as a community. And has not allowed to consistent development throughout the community. So we have, 24 districts, 5 zoning districts, the other 24, so we have 2 zoning districts, and then all these PDs. And then we have a whole bunch of variants and warrants. Warrants are the same thing as variants, as you guys understand that, right? I've never seen a community where a developer walks into the Board of Adjustment before they build anything and start asking variances. That's just uniquely, so then they're saying they're building under the code, but then they have a variance. So again, administratively, we say, well, this is SF whatever. Oh, but they got a variance. And you got to find that in the record and try to enforce it. It becomes very difficult. So what are the positives with you guys? Familiar, familiarity breeds contempt, right? Familiar is consistent, if it's consistently applied, but of course it hasn't been, because we've got all these PDs. It does provide a significant amount of restrictions and control, because it is a difficult code to develop under. So if your goal is to minimize development and you want to apply this, it can certainly be effective in doing it. But it is very inflexible. It doesn't provide any sort of mix of housing and development. You come in, you get sort of, everybody got the same lot size, everybody's got the same standard. Infill is particularly difficult, because when you have infill lots, they have unique characteristics. There's a reason why they haven't been developed in the past. It really doesn't respond well to topographical and vegetative constraints. We want to preserve trees, we want to have open space, but we're requiring them to build in rectangles. The world is not a rectangle. So let's look at density based. So the pros, flexibility, because you don't have as many standards around lot size or lot configuration. You're really looking for how many units per acre. That allows you to have more opportunities for open space and to work around topographical vegetation. That flexibility, some people can see that as a con, because of course, the developer gets more flexibility in what they bring. Their limits are more in the density side than they are in the actual form of the building they're bringing to you. And there, of course, are some pieces that you can add in to make that as flexible or less flexible, depending on what are your interests. So bounded flexibility with dimensional standards, density incentives. So this gives you an opportunity, allows communities to say, okay, we want more open space, so why don't you protect the trees? If you protect the trees on this lot, in this area, and give us some open space, we'll give you a 5% density bonus. Or something like that, to actually incent the outcomes that you want. What do you want your community to look like? What's important to you? Do you want a buffer between that and the adjacent community? Then you can use those standards to drive that outcome in the design process.
Right, yeah, and then maybe this isn't the right time to ask you, but I'm going to anyway. So when I was reading through it and reading about density-based zoning and kind of the way it was presented, you know, the materials you sent us, I mean, and again, I'm not a zoning expert, but is this a best practice across the country? Or is this, I don't know what term to use, is this some sort of new, the latest, greatest idea in urban planning? And I guess that's sort of what I'd not heard this before. Not that I have an issue with it, but I just would like a little maybe assurance that this isn't just the latest fad and we're getting stuck into another into another form. That's exactly what I was thinking. Is this going to be the 2025 version of the form-based code?
Right. No,
That's my concern.
Thank you for the question. Again, I already listed all the states I've been in. Texas seems to love the dimensional standards and the square footage standards. That seems to be the majority of zoning regulations in Texas. It's not that way in the states I've been in. So when I came here and asked them to explain the zoning to me, Texas is weird. Sorry, guys. Texas is weird in a lot of different ways. You know, OSHA doesn't apply? Sorry, that's just,
We're special.
So lots of people I've had to learn. And one of the things I've had to learn is that this is not the way we do it.
Right.
But this is the way almost everybody else I've worked in who does it. So best practice depends. I actually was.
But I also don't want to see us doing what, and I lived in Houston for 10 years.
Houston's
And
got
I
a
sure as
way
hell don't want live in another Houston,
No,
where there is no
A
freaking
Wild
zoning.
West.
No, and when they talk,
Yes,
and when they use the term density there, they actually have a density restriction. It's not the same terminology used as that we're using it here. This is basically a methodology, and you had the example where we put your corollary. So if you wanted to sort of have a low density square footage zone, you wanted to have a low density based zone, you can do that. One's SF 40, which means 40,000 square feet per lot. Another one is an R1, which means 1 unit per acre. Because 40,000 square feet is almost an acre. So you can accomplish the same thing, or very similar things. The difference is this.
Yeah.
So this is the diagrams in there. This is the same number of units. But this actually wouldn't be allowed in our code. Even though it's, big 40,000 square foot lots, it wouldn't be allowed because our dimensional standards are so strict. This wouldn't pass muster. So how do you develop this lot when you have to try and fit rectangles in there? And that's a challenge. But if you go to density, it's the same number of units, but you give smaller lots and you get open space. So that's just, what are you trying to achieve with your zoning? And, the developer sort of figures out, okay, I can do this, but you can provide, okay, if you're going to give us this much open space, you can provide an incentive. Or you can provide a disincentive if they don't. Either way.
Okay, we'll make a comment on your example. Bring it back to reality in Follett, Texas.
Okay.
I don't know when that might have changed, but I can tell you my first time around on P&Z, the first example is on the Greenwood. And there was nothing in the restrictions. It was minimal square foot. If you have an SF9, that's a minimum 9,000 square feet. Doesn't say that you can't have a 12, It doesn't say that you can't lay it out and have some 9s and some 10s and 11.3 thousand square foot lots or whatever. But we did pass 2 coving. At that time, that was the name of it, was coving, the examples. One of them is not Mariner's Mark, but Mariner's Cove, just north of it. It's D.R. Horton. And it is very similar to that right there. And the way it was coved and worked around and so forth. There was another one that we did on the coving aspect. But
Right, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, if these lots, if your minimum lot size here is 5,000 square feet, and these lots are approaching 9,000 square feet, sure, you can fit this in here and comply with the statute. The challenge is that if you wanted to do, if it's 5,000 square feet and you want to do 5,000 square foot lots, that would not work, because you would have to actually have, the difference between the minimum width and the minimum length
on the depth of the property.
is only about 10%. So your flexibility in moving those lines, unless you're underbuilding dramatically,
Which is not good.
Can I also just say, you have to have the lot width at the build line, and you have to have a minimum, I think 50 or 60 feet of street frontage. So we don't allow flexibility for flag lots at all. So that's why a lot of that also would
You
work.
point out the flag lot, the one in this bottom right corner. That's a great example. That bottom right corner where the house is, yes. Because the house can't be pulled farther up the street, and even there it's going to be constrained because of the 2 angular points on either side from your side setback. So you would have to even move that house farther back in order to meet your side setback.
so I'll show you a city of Rowlett example. This is one you denied. Remember this one? Dexham? Dexham on Middle Road?
Yeah.
Oh. So this is a development that was denied a couple months ago in Rowlett. And the interesting thing about this is that it's actually 4 units per acre. But it has lot size making it as small as 5,700 square feet. Now, of course, this is SF40. So 40,000 square foot was, this came in as a PD, right? But if you look at the adjacent community, it's actually less dense than the community that's right here.
But the one above it,
The one above it is a little less dense as well. That's why you have this buffer between the two. Again, you guys can decide what's acceptable to you. I'm just using this as an example to illustrate what, if you were looking at setting a unit size or units per acre, you give more flexibility to fit in smaller lots, and there's still a lot of rectangles, right? Because they were still working to meet the dimensional standards in our code. But significant open space was available because of the way they approached it. This is the land cost. So this goes back to something Preston was mentioning earlier. It's about economic feasibility. What can be done in our marketplace? So their cost was almost $300,000 per lot to build out this development. By the way, they spent $120,000 developing this application and then were denied. So that's another part of our communication piece here. So they're charging $420,000 per home. Again, that value is a higher value than the adjacent community. So it's not a rental community. They didn't want to go higher than 420 because right now in our market, that's the sweet spot. Houses are selling between $400,000 and $450,000. So they were shooting for where our market will currently bear. Now, if they were going to 20,000 square foot lots, they'd have to drop down to just 30 units in order to get that in there. Their total cost would go up, and they'd have to be selling it at about $600,000 per lot. Couldn't get that in our marketplace. And even that didn't meet the zoning, because that's 20,000 square feet, or it was only on that now, it's 40,000. I told you I was talking about fiscal sustainability, all right? Current tax at 20,000 square feet, tax at 4.2 units per acre. Now, the infrastructure cost between these two, about the same. So what will it cost us to maintain the roads moving forward? It's about the same. But twice the revenue ongoing to try and carry that burden. So I've also provided you, I have here more examples. So here's more examples, as you can take this home, because we have about 5 minutes left, and I promise to get you out of here by 15. This is put together by our consultant, who walks through, and she provides some different examples of zoning, and also what's called cluster development. So one of the issues we have with our current zone is redevelopment opportunities. So if you're building like this, which a lot of our community is, right? We're talking 40,000 square foot. And at some point you want to, somebody decides this house, like they did here, they didn't want to live on an acre anymore. They want to do something else. What options are available? Well, the way we currently develop that house right in the middle, it's pretty hard. If you develop in a cluster where you have the same zone, I'm not talking about more density, the same zone. But instead of that, you have something that looks like this, where the houses are up here and the lots go back. Then there's a potential opportunity that maybe at some point you're able to redevelop a portion of the property because you're clustering the development and you have more opportunities to infill. Here, if you want to do it, you've got to do it sort of flag lot. Or put a road back here, or maybe double your density. Your ability to redevelop the community over time because we're limited. So those are just some of the constraints and differences between the kind of development pattern we've had in the past, what might be available, understanding that most of our communities are already built out. So we already have 35% of it in PDs. Those PDs are there forever until the next PD, right? So it's really about how do you impact those infill lots or the redevelopment lots? What flexibility do you want to provide for, or do you not want to provide for future development? And what's the best paradigm for doing it? Okay. Really, go ahead.
If you did any kind of look of how many, if you just look at a map, areas that would be potential redevelopment areas in acres, do you have any idea what that might be?
No.
Okay.
Because it really depends on what you are looking for.
Right.
And what you're willing to allow as a community. And
Yeah, I know it's a pretty big question.
your infrastructure, it's like this right now. It's R40. It's developed.
Yeah.
So it doesn't get any more dense without you changing the zoning, either through a PD or through making a different zoning available to that area. So the question is, this is Miller. I think that your main concern here, sir, was that Dexham is underdeveloped and that traffic here could be a big challenge.
Well, that is the most northern of all the acreage. The acreage goes back south, but there's more acreage. If that topples to what they wanted in the density, then you're gonna get the same thing in two other 15 acre, 20 acre, 30 acre lots that's down in there. One's got the horses on it, it's right at the corner, and then there's one in between.
Right. So that goes back to the point. When you apply these tools, if you want to say, look, this is exactly what we want, we don't want it changing, then don't. Leave it zoned extremely rural, and that's what it is.
Christoph, you may know, just because you're neighbors with Garland, we're right across Rowlett Creek. Have you noticed that development going in there?
I have not.
Yeah.
Oh,
big,
You
big,
mean the one that backs up to the
It's apartments. No, they're not.
pump house or the
They're
sewage plant?
single family units that are, I think, maybe look like 780 square foot.
Yeah.
But they're
Oh, are you talking about Northern?
Miller.
Not off of Miller or across the creek?
Miller West
Across-
of Rowlett Creek, just north of.
The city told me that was all apartments. City of Garland told me that's what they were.
You're talking about their Miller and
They're,
Centerville, right?
That's right across my horse.
It's like a village of casitas.
They've gone broke, you can see their houses, it's not, yeah.
And so,
What bothers me is though, how was it allowed to be built with the treatment plant right next door to it?
It doesn't, how do you build a house next to a solid waste facility, you know, or how do you build a landfill? I mean, you build it.
But I understand, you know, anybody can build anywhere they want to and everything, but seriously, how's that going to be 10 years down the road after the people live there, especially during the fragrant summer of Texas?
Well, I suppose actually they're upwind, so should be too bad.
that's, I was just raising about
That's one of those things that, you know, you as a home buyer need to be aware of, you know, what's going on around you or where you're trying to buy a house.
Right.
And unfortunately, there's a lot of people who don't do that research and probably will be dissatisfied with the occasional, yeah.
So going back to your casitas, of course, I started my career in the Seattle area. Shoreline, Washington, our house had 750 square feet on the first floor. And all these houses were built in the 1940s, and they were all built for returning military coming back from World War II.
Right.
And they were all, 750 square feet on the top floor with an unfinished basement. 11,000 square foot lots. I finished my basement, that home was worth over $720,000.
That's not
And
a problem in
even-
other
and
places.
even
The McMansion is only here.
Yeah, there are some of those places where they tore down those little houses and they built,
But other places, other states, 800 square foot home is not unusual with a basement.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not saying.
It's not here, but it's not in other places.
It's not,
Well, yeah, the population here is growing.
it is.
Okay. And transportation, unfortunately, is not growing as fast as the population is growing. And so it's harder for people, in entry-level positions to be able to obtain housing at a reasonable or affordable cost. And that's really, we all know that. That's the stepping stone in the building wall.
But thank you, Mr. Cote, that sort of leads to a point I want to make about density-based zoning. It's units per acre. You can provide flexibility regarding the size of the lots and the size of the homes built for those units. So it gives you an opportunity, if you choose, to develop a zone that is 5 units per acre and allows zero lot line development as part of that process. So you can get a duplex, a townhome, as long as you don't exceed that density. So you get a row of townhomes and they get a lot of open space. But those townhomes are affordable. So again, depends on sort of what paradigm you want to follow. Yes.
Do we have some sort of estimate for what our population could be after the 2030 census?
Our population is slowing down. That's my opinion, because we're just not seeing the development we saw over the last census period. Last census period, we were the fastest growing city in Texas, I believe. But a lot of that has slowed because we're running out of undeveloped property. And now it's getting harder to develop. And we have restrictions we put in place, which if that's what the community wants, that's certainly what we'll do. Restrictions on tree preservation and things like that that make it harder to develop those infill lots, which are constrained and in most cases treed. So that has slowed our development review processes and our growth. Now, we do have some big projects going in, everybody's talking about, some of the multifamily we have going in for the form-based code. Again, my opinion, we never really followed the form-based code. Yeah, a slide on this.
To answer your question, prior to the form-based, prior to Realize Rowlett 2020, the density would allow somewhere around 68 to 75,000 at build out. And when form-based code came around and the densities that it allowed, the last I heard, and I don't know what it has been, and it could go up to a little over 100,000. Now, there's some restrictions that's been put on that since then, but I don't know how much.
Okay. So this is what a form-based.
No, it's process. That's what process.
That's the process.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's the form base.
Oh, well, it's broken. Okay, questions that you want us to bring back to you for the next meeting in order to assist in making this decision?
I have a question.
Yes.
Fiscal responsibility sounds like that's the priority. How?
It's not, it's my priority, not necessarily
Fiscal
your priority.
responsibility is a priority.
Okay, but we have to keep that, in the forefront. How much in taxes do these multifamily residences pay, all these apartments? Because my understanding is they're paying a minuscule pilot amount, and then it's tax-free for how many years? So I don't know how that adds to the fiscal responsibility of the city
Right.
when you're getting no tax revenue.
Right, well, and there are a couple of deals that were put together by the housing authority where we get a pilot instead of the full tax. That's certainly true. 190 Main is one of them, but it's not the standard. We have lots of other multifamily that are not rent subsidized and are not tax exempt.
How does the Pecos HFC in Pecos, Texas get involved in an apartment complex here in Rowlett? That's gonna cost the city like in the $1 million range of lost tax revenue.
Yeah, that's a weird, again, Texas is weird.
State law.
The legislature, that's in the legislature right now.
Oh, I know,
Yeah.
I'm watching
The
it.
Pecos, I heard, just went after another one in some other city, so apparently this.
Yeah,
Anyway, that's-
anyway, that's, but, I mean, this multi-family housing is disruptive to fiscal responsibility.
But those are certain examples of where that would not be the case. But we can certainly provide you some tax information about the ones that are not part of that program.
If, in the case of those apartment buildings, then the landlord pay the overall property tax.
No, so these are situations where they're actually got a tax exemption because the property is owned by the housing authority, or it's a tax exempt nonprofit. So they have, those are very unique situations.
Okay, I'm not a financial person, but going back to what Mr. Pollard said earlier about, okay, like with the Home Depot, why didn't we get the bigger facade than what we got right now? The harbor that's going on right now. I mean, how much tax revenue was figured in that was going to come in from a larger facility or a larger operation that we're not getting that?
But certainly we are getting sales tax from Home Depot and commercial property tax rates from Home Depot. I think that Mr. Pollard, if I put words in your mouth, please correct me. The real challenge there was development standards, which is what we require for the design of the building. Now, our authority in that area is limited by state law, as I've had to remind Mr. Pollard last meeting. But development standards aren't going to be the initial push for this process. We're really talking about zoning, getting our zoning right. Development standards are a secondary step. Zoning standards would be more stuff like landscaping, fenestration,
Like the buildings.
height of buildings, etc. That's more of your development standards rather than your zoning regulations.
I know we're trying to get out here, but can I just ask Preston one quick question? Do you have experience with density-based zoning? And anything, I mean, and I guess I would have a personal, maybe just your personal feelings on it would be.
I think probably the best example I can give you is in the Texas Hill Country. So North Texas is generally flat, similar to a cotton field, and it's very easy to develop in rectangles. You get a gridded out subdivision that has no character whatsoever, and you can burn and churn through lots and move on to the next deal. It's extremely profitable. That is not what works on an area with topo. And so the example that Christoph provided is a great example where you have a creek running through, you have a tree line. Frankly, Trails of Cotton Creek is a zoning, is a density-based development. We're tied to about 3.5 units an acre, and we're at 3 units an acre.
Oh, you Cotton Trail is a.
Part of the form-based code is tied to that density-based.
Okay.
And so we're actually underbuilding, but we're underbuilding because home prices have moved up and home buyers have said, I want a larger lot. And so the next phase is actually delivering larger lots than what was originally designed. But that flexibility was allowed because of the density-based zoning. But what it prevents the developer from doing is having to stop their project and come back to the council and say, the market has shifted and now we would like to build higher end. We would like to build denser but higher end. It allows the project to keep moving. So one, it allows timelines to move, and then two, it allows flexibility when you're dealing with topography or natural standards.
So there's just a general statement, your experiences with this.
It's been positive.
It is a positive. Okay. Thank you.
And just to be clear, we're not talking about reconciling Euclidean and form-based code. We're talking about just getting rid of that altogether and replacing it altogether with something with density. Not necessarily density, but something, whatever we choose.
Whichever method you use, we'll still have use regulations. And use regulations mean you can't put industrial in a residential zone. That's the Euclidean.
Euclidean, yeah, okay.
So whether you
So
use
it's
density,
Euclidean and then kind of some of our overlay.
correct, it's just a different approach to making, and of course, how you allow those uses to mix, that's what the form-based code is about, it allows uses to mix, right? So how we allow mixed use to occur, if we allow mixed use to occur, is a subset of the conversation.
Are there limits placed on mixed use? I mean, I can see mixed use being residential and small commerce or retail. I don't see it being, it's not going to be residential and industrial, right?
No, yeah.
No.
But it could be.
No.
Okay.
In Houston, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think what you're thinking about is go over to Richardson, and this is, I think, a real easy example, and look at City Line / State Farm. State Farm came in, had their 4 buildings, and then they wanted a bunch of apartments around it for their workforce to be able to live close by State Farm. In that particular case, if you looked at where we have such an item here in Rowlett, the North Shore, and when we went back to the comprehensive plan 2018-19, the discussion was if, and I'll use the exact example, Geico, who was bursting at the seams at the time, pre-COVID, and their offices over in just blocks from State Farm, that if they came here and they wanted a similar type housing and a similar type project to City Line, we'd probably be crazy if ENC and at City Council to chunk a thing of that nature. But you could go in at that time, but not have the zoning on the ground that completely allowed that without such a project.
Okay.
And what you've got in North Shore is right now a combination of the comprehensive plan calling it a business center basically, and yet zoning that's on the ground is form-based new neighborhood, form-based urban village is sitting out there. The people could, as long as they meet the requirements, could go ahead and build regardless of what the overall project is supposed to be.
So Preston, on the density, your experience and other projects as well, to me, it seems like that gives the developer a lot more flexibility. But because you have flexibility on economies of scale, that in my mind, that seems that that would also allow for higher quality in a lot of cases, which would go back to the fiscal responsibility of the city. So we get a good product, we get a good development, obviously it keeps property values where we want them, and it creates the interesting sort of aspect to the community. Am I thinking that in the right way?
I think you can do that. I think you have to put some protections.
That's where the buildings
code and
come
some,
in and all
and
that.
some incentives so that you don't end up with a huge park that's dedicated to the city that the city is maintaining and some very small lots that are adjacent to it that maybe don't bring up the property value.
Yeah.
So as long as there's some rails on there, I think it works.
Yeah, mixed use, my most, best example of mixed use is either Rome, Barcelona, or Paris. You know, if you're in Rome, the whole block is a 5-story building from end to end. You have a hotel here, you have a little store here, you have a dentist above it, and you have 3 stories of residence above that. And all that changes and improves.
Careful there, because in some of those places, you also have your local mechanic right next to the dentist, so, I mean, it's incredibly.
No, this is,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I have 2 questions of things for staff, just if you could help us put some parameters on it. We talked a lot about redevelopment or greenfield development, and we really focused on housing, but I think there's a big potential around that for redevelopment of commercial retail. And so how does the density-based system, I'm just not familiar with how that would apply to a commercial retail, so if you could provide some examples or guidelines of how we can redevelop the commercial retail corridors. I think that's a big tech space. And then 2, just for context, I'm curious to know how many acres are in the city, and then what the staff just ballpark thinks is considered greenfield development. So if somebody were coming today and there's essentially a 20-acre farm or a 40-acre farm somewhere that has not been developed, how much land are we talking about? Because I don't want us to go down a rabbit hole and think that we're redeveloping 2,000 acres when really all we're talking about is 150 acres of greenfield. Great.
I have a question.
Sure.
How much land is left that you have planned to do section 8 housing?
We'd never planned to do Section 8.
Well, you have the section 8 apartments, so.
No, we don't. The Section 8 is a federal program. It's not a state, it's not a state or a city program, and we don't have any ability to regulate Section 8.
Okay, so that developer who built the apartment complex, he was working in section 8. The one that's off.
Which one, of what?
Well, you've got one off of 66, you've got one off of Delaware that I know of.
So those are, so the 190 Main is the one that Ms. Williams was talking about, it's just down the street here. And that's not a Section 8 project, that's a housing authority, basically, it was a Rowlett,
RHFC, Rowlett Housing Finance Corporation.
Finance Corporation.
How many
And
of
what
those
that
do you
does, let me explain the project for you. What that does is it basically provides tax exempt status to the developer in exchange for a certain percentage of those units being low to moderate income rent control. But it's not Section 8.
How many more of those are you going to allow down in the city?
Well, the council has basically taken over the housing authority and
And quite honestly, I mean, RHFC had done some things that I don't think were in the best interest of the city. It's sort of all been, it's been taken care of.
Well, it's been future deals have been taken care of. We do still have some prior deals that haven't come to fruition yet, but have.
Through RHFC, there's only one, and that's the one on Merritt, and that's what we're talking about that Pecos made. And we don't even know the status of that for sure. That's the JPI Merritt project. Other than that, there's nothing. Now there are some apartments, multifamily that was zoned correctly at the time, and well, right past 190. So, I mean, it is what it is. So there are things that, they basically, well, I don't know, when did they put the SUP requirement on apartments?
2018.
Yeah, so for the last 3-4 years, if you want to build, even if the zoning's correct, and you want to build a multifamily, you still have to get a special use permit. So that is pretty much the hammer that the city has, to deny.
And
if
what he's
it's
referring
used.
to is what we call grandfathering. So someone comes in and they go through the process of submitting an application and taking some steps. Their grandfather under the regulations are in place at that time. So we do have a number of multifamily projects that are in the works. And as long as they continue to, for a few months, continue to progress, they can preserve that grandfathering
How many?
period of time. There's about 6.
Something like that.
But not all of them are anywhere near as big as 190.
So
are
developers
small.
can continue to come in and do that.
No,
If they're great. No. How
No,
come these 6 can?
because they're grandfathered.
because they,
They got this permit in 2018. I've seen one 2018, 2016.
Yeah.
We can't go back and pull it out from underneath.
Gotcha.
All we can do is,
It's called
is
vested
stop
rights.
it forward.
There's 300 units that's just to the south of 190 that just came into well, part of it came into PNC. That was set back in 2016. There's just not anything you can do to go back. Now, the only thing that can happen is, and they told us 2 weeks ago in PNC that they were not planning on doing that, and that is to go to like Rowlett Housing Finance and say, okay, we'll take however number of units and turn that. But as I'm understanding, the city council's already told them, no, we're not doing that anymore.
That's not.
But anyway, there's units out there in the inventory that's already been passed, and you can't, as long as they build to the zoning and the requirements at the time that was put in, you can't stop it.
How many homes are in the city at this point?
45,000 is the number over here.
45,000 in the city, 24 when I call the city.
I don't know how accurate it is, but for them.
Do you know how many
Can
houses?
you find, how many houses are currently in the city?
We'd have to look here, we could write it down.
Okay, and then how many houses could be in the city based on how roughly the land, I know it depends on how you develop it, but how many?
Well, I think that's the thing that's really hard for us to answer. Because again, it depends on the decisions that
You
and
That's
future
what
council.
40.
What do you want?
Well, we are getting a little bit far afield too, of what I think our objectives are here.
Mark?
I just have a question, actually went on my mind
Yeah,
for clarifying,
46.
and it's actually in reference to Sapphire Bay.
okay.
Kennedy, whatever, he got it.
Hang on,
He got
sorry,
it.
hold on. Thank you. Hard of hearing, but I can't hear his question. With your conversation, their conversation.
So, yeah, so I was saying, my question is basically, revolves around the Sapphire Bay. My general main question is, if the developer comes in, so that, I'm gonna do something with this land, how long, is there a specific time that he has to do it, or can he sit on it forever?
It depends. It depends on that specific example. That developer has a development agreement. So he came through and put together, it's kind of like the PD example, where they actually put together the Trails of Cotton and Creek also has a development agreement, where they basically say, this is what we're going to do as far as infrastructure, and we have the authority to do it. And that basically locks in their rights to do that project. Now, if that project doesn't progress consistent with the terms of that agreement, then there's some potential to go back and see if you can enforce the terms of that agreement. But it really depends on that. It also depends on, there's a risk associated with that, because if the city basically steps in, because the developer's having a challenge, and tries to enforce the agreement, the developer can walk away, and you've got an unfinished development. So then what do you think?
You got any financial recourse?
Maybe, maybe not.
I mean, it's the simple of my question. 10 years from now.
Yeah.
that land is still can be sitting there and used. That's my general question.
Actually, it can.
Yeah. They got these
He
developments.
can go ahead and do a survey, and 2 years later, put in a road. 7 years later, or a couple of years later, I can use it, as long as he progresses.
And I think the challenge is that lots of times citizens think the city has more control than it does.
Well, yeah.
They'll come to us and say, you know, we want, the first city I was in, not the first actually, the third city I was in, we really want an Olive Garden. Why can't the city get us an Olive Garden? That was, you know, this is North Carolina. That was the height of their success. If we could just get Jacksonville, North Carolina, we could just get an Olive Garden. That was success. And they were mad at the city for not getting them an Olive Garden. Well, we're not developers. This is the partnership here. We can set the table, but the developer has to come in with the resources and the finances and the economics to either make it happen or not make it happen.
Well, along the same line, he asked about, you know, how long can the sapphire bay keep dragging the thing? How much input does the city have on vacant lots that are existing, especially on main thoroughfares? And in perfect example, Shawhawk and Rowlett Road.
Yeah, very little.
I mean,
We can set the table.
I know when I moved here, there was a house there. You know, there was a nice house. Oh man, did you go pick its pecans and everything, man? But it's gone now. It's been gone for several years. And just like the lot that's back behind the Circle K, or the lot that was next to the Shell station, you know, for years. I know that the guy that owned the Shell station wanted to buy that property and develop it.
City has, it's the
Okay.
owner of the property and
Do we have any, does the city have any influence on it, or is it?
Only through our zoning,
Okay.
or the other challenge we have here in all that, I'm sorry, we are on the time,
Okay.
is that we don't have an economic development increment. So some cities will try to use incentives to bring different kinds of businesses that they want. But even that's a marginal success. It really is the market conditions. So what do you do to set the market conditions? If you want sit-down restaurants, then you have to have a lunch crowd. You know, you have to have some density.
You have to have people that can pay for
You
it.
have to have people who can pay for it. So all you can do is try to create the environment for those kinds of investments to make sense to the private sector. But you really can't control what happens.
The last question I've got too is, and I know I've seen this on the Facebook pages and everything, and I know who owns it and everything, but you know, you've got Mill Road being expanded, then you got Mill Road being expanded. You got that freaking bridge sitting there. And I know the city of Dallas owns it.
Absolutely.
Can we not do anything about that?
We are trying.
Yeah.
So far, we have failed.
Those are way outside of
Okay.
Well, it's
outside of the converson we're having here. Those are, you know.
So that's
Better talk to your city
if you
council.
think of a question, then
Plus.
you can see.
Is there one over there?
before you close, this is more of a comment than a question. I think we all to also realize, why did you move here? And again, why did you not move somewhere else? Do you want the rest of the city to build out where they have a 12 by 12 backyard, 12 foot by 12 foot backyard? If you do, then we get the higher density. If you want something like probably we all have, a yards, that you have room for things, then we gotta look at that. And I think because the majority of the people that's moved here has single family home and they have yards, do we want the rest of the citizens to put up with a higher density where they don't have yards? Maybe so. Maybe somebody's like me that's now in their 70s and says, gee, I don't want to mow my yard anymore, I want less yard. But I think that's what we've got to realize.
One of them, so I just want to point out, that's step 2. We're not there yet. That's step 2. Step 1 is our toolbox. Certainly one of those toolboxes would be low density residential. If you want to apply that everywhere, you can certainly do that as a key. Last thought, because we're
Yeah, real quick, though, kind of the tag on what Mr. Pollock's saying, but let me ask you this, Krista. What does the city do when it gets to the point where, like, let's say Rowlett built out all SF40s and our infrastructure is in need of repair? We have streets, I mean, I'm pretty sure on the capital improvement task force, we went and drove streets that I didn't think really, I don't think that they even knew how to spell street. But we just don't have the money to be able to maintain all those streets. How do you,
Well,
because the city is tied to that formula.
Thank you
Got
for,
low
thank you
income
for your,
housing, you're not gonna
thank
have
thank
it.
you for your,
Got low income housing, you're not gonna have it, but they're not gonna.
Oh, no, I'm talking if it's all built out in this up forward, you only have a certain amount of dollars coming in.
Look at the city of Parker or the city of Lucas and go look at their budgets and they're having the same problem. The city of
Right.
Parker is 1 and 2 acre lots, city of Lucas is 2 acre lots. Lucas held to their guns and their property values are higher, Parker's are high, but they're not as high as Lucas's. And Parker is trying to figure out how to balance their budget, because they can't do it, they're underwater. And right now, their tax rate is 100% on residents, because they have no commercial retail zoning. So their only recourse is to raise property taxes. And the entire council's up for election, because they're raising property taxes.
right, and the only way we can do that, more than 3.5%, is to have an election. And, you know, personally, I want to pay more taxes. But the other thing is, you look at the cost of your infrastructure. I love my alley, but alley doubles the infrastructure costs. So, you know, how we build impacts that equation as well. If we want that as a community, we're willing to pay for it, okay. But we have to recognize that there is a cost on the other side.
And that's what I want to make sure that everybody at the table understands. There is a cost to our decisions one way or the other.
Well, I think density is not singular, and that's currently what your zoning is density is singular. If you're 4,000, you get a bunch of 4,000 square foot lots. But if you go to density-based zoning, you have an incentive to build some larger lots, some middle-sized lots, and some smaller lots. I met a family at a grand opening out of Cotton Creek 2 weeks ago that both the grandparents moved from San Antonio to Houston, and they're in attached single-family homes that have no maintenance. The HOA takes care of their yard. And their kids built a palatial home, you know, a big lot with a big backyard, and they opened to a park. And the parents wanted to live in the same community where they could be taken care of as they go. So I think there's a mix there. You had a large lot that's 80 feet wide, and then 2 lots that are 35 feet wide. So your density.
It's called generational housing,
Right, yeah.
where you basically stay in the same neighborhood as you move from the starter home to the midlife home to the retirement home,
Yes.
within the same community.
And that, again, is the reason why auxiliary housing units are something that we need to look at as well.
Thank you for your time.